Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Mimi. Glad to be here.
So just talk about the Abundance Institute, your mission, and how you're funded.
Yeah, of course. I'm Josh Smith. I'm the energy policy lead for the Abundance Institute. We are a mission-driven nonprofit that's interested in making sure that entrepreneurs and innovators have both the policy environment and the cultural environment to try new ideas, experiment, and innovate new products and services that eventually push forward human prosperity and flourishing. We're grateful to be funded by a variety of foundations and individuals, which allow us to come on and do shows like this with you.
Well, let's talk about the AI action plan that the administration announced recently. Give us the high-level view first, if you would, about the action plan and why it was needed.
Yeah, the action plan is needed they have one of my favorite quips about understanding problems in both the AI space and the energy space, which is very simple: build, baby, build. We face a lot of artificial barriers to doing exactly that and simply that, and the AI action plan is a set of to-do lists, effectively, of try these things, get together with industry, find the things that are blocking you rolling out new technologies, and let's find ways to remove them. And very simply, I think that's the right way to answer concerns about building the energy supply needed to meet data centers. It's the answer to finding ways to bring electricity prices down for you and me as consumers. And so I'd say that captures the real meat of the report very simply: build, baby, build.
All right, so let's put up the information on the infrastructure part of that AI action plan, and that's this. So there's going to be streamlining the permitting process, strengthening the power grid, developing high security data centers, and revitalizing the semiconductor manufacturing. Let's break that down a little bit. If you could first talk a little bit about the streamlining the permitting process. What is the process now, and why does it need to be streamlined?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mimi. It's a fundamental one. In any context where you're using federal lands or even receiving federal funds, you have to go through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, very simply. And the way that I want all of your listeners to think about NEPA is that it is an indiscriminate killer. It has killed pipelines, it has killed solar farms, it has been used against offshore wind. It is a set of tools for people to stop development of all kinds, no matter the actual environmental effects of the development. And so if we want to leverage the wide federal estate that we have, you have to go through this NEPA process. On average, the NEPA process at the most intensive level takes about 4 years to complete. That's despite a statutory requirement that these environmental impact statements take 2 years. 2 out of 3 reviews are actually late. They take longer than that. And on average, it takes 4 years. So that's a core reason to move forward. The categorical exemptions for data center infrastructure reflect, okay, we think we can establish these types of developments shouldn't need to go through the full NEPA process. Let's streamline those applications. Let's make sure that they get done swiftly, quickly, and we don't hamstring our own development with a bunch of bureaucratic paperwork.
So why does the push for AI require so many data centers to be built?
Yeah, I think people often underestimate just the extent that data centers undergird all of modern life. So the conversation we're having now is possible because I'm sitting here in Logan, Utah, and somewhere there's a data center processing the things I'm saying and feeding it all the way back out to DC, to you, and then out again to your listeners. If you think about just the amount of storage that has expanded across the system, every photo you take of your kids, every photo you take of your dinner plate or your coffee, whatever it is, and you post it on Instagram, that ends up stored on your phone. That might end up stored up on your phone and in a cloud storage system. And then if you upload it to Instagram, if you put it on Twitter, there's more data centers that hold that information. And then it's accessible anywhere. You can go to Europe, it can still pull up. You can go to Africa, still pull it up. And that's the potential for these kinds of data centers. In terms of AI development, these end up being large databases of information that they process, from books, movies, TV, everything. And they take that data and try and build large language models out of it, which is an area you should talk to a real expert in LLMs instead of me. But in the context, what that processing takes is a lot of electricity. It takes a lot to build, to churn through all that information, establish the patterns, and then enable you and me to use it in all the ways that we are.
So, Josh, explain the need for electricity and why it requires so much more than any other regular data center.
Yeah, that's a great question. So these can be just much, much larger. So the kinds of data centers that might be serving my Zoom call here with you that's getting transmitted to listeners ultimately are going to be different than these AI specific data centers. Those are large installations. They can be something like 100 megawatts is not uncommon. The kinds of big developments in Texas, the Crusoe development, for example, is a gigawatt with even behind the meter gas generation. And that is to enable all of that processing to happen as fast as possible, to make sure that they have the computers standing by, the chips standing by to process and do the math and figure out what are those patterns to exploit going forward. And most of your listeners are probably using that with, say, the image generation options to make funny pictures of cats or to reskin their favorite pictures of themselves in whatever style they're interested in. But it's also being used to do medical innovations. It's used by material sciences researchers to establish what kinds of new materials themselves might be promising for then humans to go in and investigate. So there's a lot of different uses beyond the consumer day-to-day.
If you'd like to join our conversation with Josh Smith, if you've got a question about how AI impacts the energy sector, you can go ahead and call in now. Our lines are Republicans, 202-748-8001, Democrats, 202-748-8000, and Independents, 202-748-8002. We also have a line set aside. If you work in AI or in the energy sector, you can call us on 202-748-8003. Let's talk to callers and start with Jeff, Independent Line, Port Angeles, Washington. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, y'all. So this is maybe a bit nebulous, but if the large language model AIs have already scraped the web of all information, why wouldn't there just be one artificial intelligence? And maybe you can't answer that, but it's just something that I've been pondering.
Do you mean?
I'll listen on.
Do you mean one company, Jeff, for AI?
Well, yeah, just one particular AI
model.
I mean, there's,
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, this would be a great question for Taylor Barkley on our team at Abundance Institute or Neil Chilson, who do a lot more of the AI specific kind of work. But the good news is that there is a lot of innovation. As an economist, I like to see a lot of people involved in a space to keep it competitive, to keep it dynamic. And I would be scared if there was just one company providing all the AI services, because that signals, a lack of competition, a sort of monopoly. In terms of the data access and things, I think it suggests, there's been a huge improvements in AI over the last 4 or so years. There's still a lot to do. There's a lot of applications that are consumer focused, like the ChatGPT image generation or text generation. And then there's the hyper specific industry style ones. So you're going to see, I think, AI become a lot like washing machines, which is they do these amazing things for us every day, saving time, but they're only noticed when they break, right? So my wife's favorite example of this is using the Amazon's, I think it's called Rufus, to automate and read through the reviews and give you a summary of those. In that context, if you don't have enough reviews, Rufus doesn't show you a kind of breakdown, and then you go through it yourself. And my wife was saying, I didn't even realize that they were doing this and that I'd already gotten accustomed to it until here's a couple products that we were looking at that didn't have enough reviews to be a useful backbone for the large language model to process. And that's inconvenient, but inconvenient in the same way that when your washing machine's broken, you suddenly realize how valuable it is.
Linda, Orange, Connecticut, line for Democrats. You're next.
Good morning. You stole a little bit of my question, Mamie, but that's okay. Who's going to pay for it? Now, sir, before the show, I researched a little bit about your group, and I was fascinated by a section that you had that said restoring old energy lines. Now, I understand that you're saying that, it's going to be the ones who use it pay for it, but that's never true. Now, who's going to pay for restoration of old energy lines? And quite frankly, where I live, we can't sell back excess energy to the power companies. So if I generate more than I use, I don't get a net benefit from that financially. I do because my electric bill goes down. But this is kind of a buyer beware question. I want to know what you're really doing there and who's going to pay for this ultimately. How are you going to restore old public lines without having the public pay for it? And I'll take that question off there.
All right, Linda. And Josh, I'll just add to that this Axios article saying that electricity costs rise amid data center boom. And it says that electricity costs are rising nationwide and could get even higher. It says surging power bills could further stress many Americans' budgets. Go ahead with your answer.
Linda, that's a perfect question. So the kinds of problems there reflect the longstanding sort of monopoly system that we have. I don't know much about the Connecticut system in detail, but it sounds like you have one service provider. You don't get a choice on who is providing your electricity. And so there's almost certain to be cost shifts in those kinds of systems. If you don't have a system where, say, in PJM, in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, you have the opportunity to shop for power, there's still lots of limits on that. And then, of course, those are conversations about large-scale development rather than household size. If you're interested in those kinds of questions, I'd recommend one of our fellows, Lynn Kiesling. She's also runs the Institute for Regulatory Law and Economics. She writes a lot about what she calls transactive energy, which is literally, Linda, if you and I live next to each other, sometimes I could buy power from you, sometimes you'd be buying power from me. If I've got a battery system and you have solar, and there's a lot of opportunities in that distributed energy or DER space. I think full of opportunities to make the grid stronger, to power even the AI development by making sure that communities have their own power supplies in cases of extreme weather. And then in the case of cost shifts, it's totally fair and entirely worthwhile to remain skeptical of the deals that come out of PUCs and with monopoly utilities, because if you look at them, they're often quite redacted. They don't provide full information, which is why I like systems like the Texas model that provide very competitive electricity systems, or like Utah's recent innovation in allowing some amount of choice and competition. In the Utah bill, for example, the industrial infrastructure, so the substations and the wires, all are studied by the PSC, and then the Public Utility Commission, provides a sort of estimate of the cost and assigns those to the new large loads. And that's the right way to make sure that data centers don't shift costs from themselves onto grandma and the rest of us.
In Portland, Oregon, Independent Line, Shah Alpha.
Thank you very much. Sir, I used to work at a company, a local municipal utility in Massachusetts called Bell, the Braintree Electric Light Department. And we used to the deregulation, we're buying and selling electricity, for example, in Japanese, Tatoeba, for example, the Seabrook nuclear power plant. This is not the America I signed up for when I came to your country in 1984. The same thing happened in the airlines, the same thing happened in the energy industry. The more promises you make about efficiency, let me make this quick because this is not a think tank. Artificial intelligence in energy sector, it sounds like Skynet. That's what I think. And I'll conclude there. Thank you very much.
Any comment there, Josh?
Thank you for your question, as always. I think there's been a lot of improvements in efficiency. You can look through I think it's the National Bureau of Economic Research published a paper in the last few months. They've run a working paper series. So these aren't peer-reviewed yet, but it's considered an incredibly good scholarly resource. They've published several papers about electricity companies or electricity generators that become subject to competition and the way that they become more efficient after that. And then Alfred Kahn, of course, wrote the book on the economics of regulation and uses airlines as one of his core examples of success. But those are the places that I'd look if you're thinking about the efficiency. And of course, welcome to America. Glad to have you here.
And Josh, there are other alternative energy sources that are being investigated for AI. Part of that is nuclear, as far as fission and fusion. Can you talk about where that is and when that could start coming online, if at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Nuclear has a lot of potential, and maybe Linda's question earlier about restarting new lines was about 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania getting turned back on. And I think those are incredibly exciting opportunities. There's a couple of nuclear plants where that's an option, that they can be restarted. We should be doing all of those that we can. Luckily, 3 Mile Island is exactly that kind of private investment. Microsoft is working with Constellation, the plant owner, to get it back up and running. It's not going to come onto your bill if you are in the area. It should help lower those bills by meeting the electricity demands and reducing scarcity. But there's only a limited number of those plants that existed, that we built, that can be restarted. There's a few places where we could add a new reactor on sites, but a lot of promise seems to be in the small modular reactor space. And there's a lot of innovation here. There's been billions from the private sector coming in. There's a lot of opportunities in that space. The good news there is that the potential for SMRs is a bit like the batteries that you put into consumer devices. There's opportunities to tailor the reactor to the needs. So you can imagine remote towns in Alaska that have their own reactor to power the city's needs. You could imagine even remote towns in Utah having these kinds of reactors. And the big picture story with nuclear that everyone should remember is that it wasn't long ago, it's within recent American living memory, that we built nuclear plants swiftly, cheaply, and safely. It used to be about 5 years and $1 billion in the case of Connecticut Yankee. And actually Seabrook plant that came up briefly is an example of sort of the obstinate and sort of NIMBY, not in my backyard sentiment that slowed development and ended up driving up costs for nuclear development and making it uncompetitive with dirtier sources like coal and natural gas. So there's a lot of potential in this space. I expect reactors to come on in the next 5 to 10 years and be commercially viable. There's tons of test reactors. In particular, for people who are interested, they should look at the Idaho National Laboratory's work in the area. And Canary Media had a piece out a couple weeks ago talking about, I think there are 70 SMRs of different kinds, small modular reactors of different kinds in development in different stages.
But Josh, when you say coming online safely, a lot of people remember those nuclear plant disasters.
Yeah, of course, the good news is 3 Mile Island's release, for example, did not create any cancer deaths related to the radiation. In the same case for Fukushima. Fukushima is actually a case study in the fear of radiation causing more deaths than radiation itself. And that's because even though the estimates for the release from Fukushima in Japan were expected to be quite small in terms of their health effects, they're basically undetectable, the Japan evacuated a lot of people, and more people died in that evacuation than will ever die from the radiation effects of Fukushima. So our fear of radiation kills more people every day than does nuclear energy. And you can see this in the statistics. I testified in DC 2 weeks ago on these kinds of issues, and nuclear is by far the safest source of energy, on par with solar and wind sorts of, in terms of deaths per terawatt hour of energy. And that includes disasters like Chernobyl, which is, again, Chernobyl is a fault of a freak design that no one in their right minds would ever build ever again. And of course, SMRs again are going to be even safer because they're being rethought from the top to bottom. Maybe you build them deep underground so that they're naturally contained if there is a problem. And of course, you're also dealing with much, much smaller plants. And so the kinds of problems that might occur are by necessity much, much smaller.
And Josh, you did just mention wind and solar. Are there any provisions here for green energy?
In the AI action plan, this is one of the areas I think that's really missing. And that's because if you look at a map of the U.S. federal lands, again, federal lands trigger all the federal permitting requirements, and that can be a big challenge for getting a solar farm connected, getting a wind farm connected. And so there's a ton of opportunities in the southwestern part of the U.S., in my neck of the woods in Utah, in Texas, in New Mexico, and in Texas, there's tons of opportunity because it's mostly private land. In Utah, where it's mostly federal lands, it's impossible to site and permit solar farms on these. The reviews take years. People can get in the way by suing and holding things up in court. And all of that holds back the AI development that can power future human prosperity. So there's a lot of opportunities to unlock more of these kinds of technologies through the same kinds of permitting reform and the build, baby, build mentality that is embodied in the report.
Here's Beth in Wisconsin, Republican. Good morning, Beth.
Good morning. I'm wondering how much sound or noise do these AI power generating plants produce? If you're living in a neighborhood and one goes in, a couple blocks from you or a block from you, what is that going to involve?
Yeah, that's an important question too. The good news is that a lot of these designs of data centers are getting better at isolating any noise. Most of that noise, if you think about your computer operating, when is your computer loud? It's loud when the fan kicks on because it's overheating. And that's the same case for data centers. They have large cooling systems if they're air cooled. And so designing those systems to provide sound breaks and making sure that that sound stays isolated is entirely reasonable. And the good news for policymakers is that they already have effective noise control limits on the books. So there's ample reason and ability for community members who are disadvantaged to go to the city councils, to go to state governments and say, these guys are over the noise limits that's established, you need to fix that. And I think that's the right way to deal with AI data center builds and with AI as a whole is, remember, we already have a lot of rules on the books and there's no need to add a bunch of new additional permitting restrictions or siting restrictions because we already have tons of those in place.
Beverly in Ohio, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning, Josh. I am so glad you talked about wind turbines. My sister lives in Huron County, Ohio, and Apex wants to build wind turbines 100 feet from her home, and she's very, very, very against it because it'll ruin the idyllic countryside and it will ruin farmlands. And the Power Siting Board in Columbus voted for these many wind turbines in Erie and Huron counties, and we cannot get a hold of the Power Siting Board. They live in Columbus, and they know nothing about Bellevue, Ohio, and Monroeville, Ohio. And we do not want wind turbines in our idyllic countryside. It would be wonderful if they were in Texas and Utah. So can you tell Apex and the Power Siting Board in Ohio to send those wind turbines to Texas and Utah, and we do not want them in Huron or Erie counties. And
all
can
right,
you
Beverly.
tell our...
Go ahead.
Thanks, Beverly. You cut out a little bit, so I apologize if this isn't a full answer to your question. But I think the right ways to handle this are actually, if you really don't want wind turbines next door, well, there's some market value that the landowner next door is getting from that wind turbine. And there's no reason you can't pool together your funds with neighbors to say, look, John, we know you want to put in this wind turbine. We think that affects our view shed. We would love to pay you not to do that. These kinds of agreements are actually pretty common in the environmental space. For one example, that the Property Environment Research Center in Bozeman, Montana has written a lot about, they work with nonprofits that contract with ranchers who don't want wolves reintroduced into the area, because if you reintroduce wolves into an area where you're ranching cattle, you're going to lose cattle to those wolves. And so the nonprofits in this space work with those ranchers to say, look, we'll pay you for the market value of those cattle that get taken. And I think that's the right way to both respect the property rights of ranchers, to respect the property rights, in this case, of landowners who want to put in a wind turbine, and to make sure everyone kind of has an ability to do the things they want with their property, right? And this is an important question. I think it's clearly roiling all sorts of agricultural communities across the country. I think there's a 1 in 7 or so U.S. counties has a restriction on wind or solar development that reflects exactly the feelings that you have, Beverly. And I think the right ways to deal with this are less than going to power siting boards and asking them to not approve permits that might otherwise be lawfully granted, but instead to say, look, we really, John, don't want you to put in this wind turbine, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. And I think that's the right way to solve a lot of these complaints and concerns.
Mike, in Odom, Texas, you work in the energy sector, Mike. What do you do there?
I have worked in the energy sector as a utility worker, safety worker. I appreciate the technical expertise of Mr. Smith and the fact that the program is taking time to explore the facts of the technologies and, kind of get away from a lot of just the assumptions about the dangers of these type of things. My question for Mr. Smith is, what about the agreements, whether it's PJM or Southern Power Pool, that these data centers are making in the event of catastrophic power loss, hurricanes, freezes, those kind of events? What are they building into these agreements that allow these centers to help in those situations?
Yeah, that's an exciting area. There's a lot of opportunities for data centers since they usually build one-to-one backup systems. That's often a diesel generation that they can turn on when when power goes out locally, say they lose a transmission line or they have some kind of other weather-related outage. And so they fire up the diesel gen so they can keep chugging along. One of the things that I've worked on a little bit is how to make data centers broadly assets and not liabilities to the grid by enabling greater backup use during peak moments on the electricity system, or by encouraging them to bring their own generation. And so with Gideon Powell, we wrote a piece for Utility Dive advocating for these kinds of agreements where, say, when electricity prices on the grid that you and I are paying go really, really high, data centers could turn on their own backup systems. There's a lot of these kinds of innovations that have happened on sort of the sidelines so far. In Wyoming, for example, a small town told a data center company that they wouldn't build a gas plant. They wouldn't allow the data center to build there because the data center was larger, I think, than the city's total megawatt use. And so what the company did was actually build that gas plant themselves. And when the local grid gets stressed, they turn on that gas plant to help alleviate the system stress. You could do this all sorts of ways. You could provide battery backups to people across the area to relieve grid constraints. And one of the best parts of the AI Action Plan, I think, is actually exactly this. How do you enable these sorts of different arrangements? Instead of just having a utility provide you power, how do you get the data center involved, thinking about its power use and its sort of ripple effects down the system and on other users? How do you get batteries in places to manage grid fluctuations? How do you get people to do things that they had never considered doing before because it used to just be you plugged into the grid system and then that was that. Today, and because of the speed we need to move at, we need to be thinking about how to get flexible backup systems like the gas backup system I mentioned, or how to get more data centers to put in batteries on site. So during the few hours a day when the system is stressed, they can turn on and run on batteries for just a short time. There's a lot of innovations in this area, and a lot of them will end up putting money in your pocket, especially in Texas. If you have some kind of generating asset or a battery on your home, you can sell that into the market in the way that Linda's earlier question mentioned. So Base Power is one example. David Energy is another. Both are companies that do exactly that. They enable you, if you can serve the system needs, to actually make money in return for serving the general system.
Finally, Josh, I want to ask you about semiconductors, because that's part of the AI action plan, is to revitalize semiconductor manufacturing. Isn't that what the Biden administration's CHIPS Act was meant to do, or is this doing something in addition to that?
I think that's right. I'm not an expert on semiconductor manufacturing or in these kinds of in these industries and how the right ways to move them forward. But I do think that there, even the build baby build mentality matters. And that's because if you look at a lot of the CHIPS Act developments, I think most of those were exempted from NEPA. And that's because they didn't want them to get tied up in endless delays that we see affecting pipelines, solar farms, wind farms, and battery installations today. So there's a lot of opportunities if we clear the way and make it easier to build for electricity prices prices to fall, for consumers to benefit, and for us to maintain a sort of dominant position in the AI race.
One more call for you. This is Eric in New York, Democrat. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, hi, Josh. It's nice to see you. I'm hockeying my living room rug right now. Hokey is a non-powered brush vacuum invented, I guess, in the Depression. My question is about the wisdom of putting all our chips on the AI square, and the cost is going to be a lot of energy. So I guess we are not in the AI realm yet to predict what this huge draw on our energy availability and pull out all the stops, coming up with new small nuclear generation plants, heating up the groundwater with geothermal, which I'm thinking of using in my house, by the way. Geothermal sounds great, but if everybody uses geothermal, I don't know how cool it's going to be down there anymore. It's just there's the unforeseen consequence thing that I'm not hearing. So that's basically the realm of my question.
Yeah, I think it's an important area. A lot of the load growth coming, right? There's 120 gigawatts or so of load growth expected, according to Rob Gramlich and his team at Grid Strategies. But that's not the only sources, right? So electrification of transportation, the electrification of heating and cooling, all of that reflects load growth as well going forward. Not to mention, if we're going to bring U.S. semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. or grow the industry, that's also an energy-intensive group or kind of industry. So that 120 gigawatts of data center demand is sort of let's get going on this load growth, because there's a lot of services that are needed. And the fundamental point that I think you highlight implicitly is prosperity is energy intensive. There's a lot of ability for us to power new innovations of all kinds, whether that's the electric vehicle, whether it's the battery that has to be charged to be useful to you later. All of those require electricity, and all of them make your life better in some way, or you wouldn't have purchased them. And so there's a lot of opportunities to make sure that we build a system where people who want to build data centers pay for those developments themselves, and we have electricity available not just for the big dogs like Amazon and Google and Microsoft, Meta, but for the upstart in their garage to be able to test and try things. And there's a lot of opportunities to do exactly that by making it easier to build, baby, build.
Josh Smith, he is Energy Policy Lead at the Abundance Institute. You can find more about them at abundance.institute. Josh, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.